Hi, my name's Greg from Canopi, and today I want to share with you a conversation that's been running around the office for the last couple of weeks, and it is around the term what is competent and what does competency mean in the workplace or in your organisation or in your community, and what is the difference between being current, i.e. licensed or certified, competent, and then confident. So today we're going to work through those three things, provide you an example using first aid as an example, and then we're going to have a little discussion around what API and microlearning might play in that. And then at the end, we've got a little challenge for you. Okay, welcome back. As I said, we've been sort of working around the office about really what are these performance support systems in an organisation and how do they affect somebody's competency? Because quite often, and we'll do a little diagram here, we run a training course and then that will actually make somebody current or certified, if you like, for a period of time. And generally, that's 1 year or 3 years is the common sort of workplace practice. And so really down here, somebody has no skills, they'll attend the workshop and the training course, and then they're deemed current. And they'll stay current for a period of time. And here in our example, how about we just use 3 years? But what we've found through research and some projects we've done with clients is that while somebody is considered current in their particular skill, that they're not always competent, and that over time the skills that were taught in the training course have sort of expired, waned away, gone off. And so what we sort of find is that if people aren't practicing skills, their actual competency curve tends to drop off. So yes, I was competent for a period of like 3 months in this period here, but then my skills sort of started to dry off because I hadn't been practicing in the workplace. And we're going to use first aid, as I said, as an example of this one here. In first aid, there's a range of competencies, and today's going to be a really colourful sort of drawing, but let's put a couple of them over here. So there's bleeding, CPR, and we'll call it fractures, and bites. So in a training course, first aid training course, you'll be given some training and you're deemed competent in about 12 different competencies: slings, fractures, poisons, bites and stings, CPR, and resuscitation. But what happens if I'm a school teacher, for example, in the playground, I'll probably get a lot of practice with bites and stings. Bee stings happen all the time. You get familiar with how to sort of treat those and respond to those. And you probably get soft tissue injuries as well. Kids sprain their ankles on the playground. You might even have once or twice a year a kid in the playground might sort of actually fracture a limb or break a limb. So those competencies sort of stay current. So it's not that all of your competencies drop off. If you're rehearsing those skills and practicing them, and regardless of your workplace, it's the same. If you do something over and over again, you'll maintain competency, develop experience and expertise, and eventually you'll master those sorts of things. But in something like first aid, if you're not sort of doing CPR on a regular sort of basis over those 3 years, your competency is going to drop off, and therefore also this other related term that we've been talking about called confidence. Your ability to sort of look at a situation and go, I feel like I can respond to that situation. And first aid is a high stakes emergency sort of situation, but it's a really good exemplar, I think, of is somebody confident to go and do the particular skill. So I'm currently certified for first aid. It was about 2 years since I did my first aid course. I remember some key things, and this is because I've done it 5 or 6 times now, that danger, response, airways, breathing, circulation, and defibrillation, DRS, ABCD. That has stuck in my head. I had to go back this morning and check, is it 30 compressions to 2 breaths or 20 compressions to 2 breaths? So that number's kind of in my head, the fact that you do a fair few and then you do 2 breaths if you choose to do breathing. In Australia, it's not advocated that you have to do breathing, but it's recommended. But was I really competent in doing those things? I didn't really know the number off the top of my head. So whilst it's better to do some CPR, it's also important that you kind of do it reasonably well, but better to do some than none. So even if I was doing 20 and 2, that's better than not responding at all. The question comes is, am I confident I could do it? Now, I've been lucky enough to actually go to the factory where they make the mannequins, and they actually got me on an electronic mannequin. They said, sit down there and try and do CPR properly, like the most effective way. Quite literally, I've moved on a bit in life, I'm not the young man I used to be. I could not do good quality CPR for more than 2 minutes. I was literally exhausted, right? Now, I could keep going for about another 2 minutes, but probably 4 minutes in, not on. So you sort of go, look, here's a mannequin, and this is one from Laydell. It's a portable sort of mannequin for training purposes. But whilst I knew the location, whilst I knew the head tilt and those sorts of things, when I did it yesterday in the office, I did forget the head tilt. So am I competent? If I had to do that skill, could I do it? As I say, better to give it a go and do substandard CPR than no CPR. But am I confident I could do it, given that I live in a regional area and I'm probably about 15 minutes away from any sort of first responder? Could I do it for 15 minutes? Probably not. So whilst I'd say I'm partially competent, I'm not really confident that I could actually do those skills. For me personally, it wouldn't stop me doing it. I would still get in, I would still give it a go. Unfortunately, I've never had to do that. But there are some situations where people would say, look, I'm not confident to do it because the person's not in a position I can get to, like either down on the ground, or they might be in a vehicle or something like that. So these performance support systems are really about, whilst I'm current in first aid and I can give CPR, or my ticket says I can give CPR and I meet my insurance requirements for my business, I kind of think I'm competent, but I'm down on this curve somewhere on that curve. And where is my confidence? I'm not confident I could give good quality CPR for the required time living in a regional area. Wouldn't stop me doing it. So you might argue that Greg is confident he could do CPR. Yeah, the quality might be down, but he is confident he could do it. And there's another sort of thing around competency. The other example we had this morning is, with an EpiPen. If somebody's having an allergic reaction and you have the EpiPen here, one of our staff here, who's a certified instructor, actually he said, okay, so what do you do? And I said, well, you pop the top off, that's the first thing you do, and then you look for the thigh and you whack it in and you get the click, you listen for the click. He said, no. Right? He pointed out to me that one of the first things, or the first thing you have to do is check the expiry date. Critical, because these things lie around for years in a house, in a first aid kit or whatever, and they do become ineffective. So, whilst I am deemed to be current with my first aid, am I competent with administering an EpiPen? I would have failed, totally failed, and that would have actually impacted the outcome for a person participating or having an incident. It's interesting, we've been talking around the office around, what is that, and how does an organisation know that they can rely on people to behave the way they need them to, in this case with first aid, in a time of emergency? So it leads this question of, do we know where people are at on these curves? These curves, I think, are quite predictable, right? In different settings, you could say, look, I could actually, track that curve, and I could say that these skills are sort of expiring because people don't get to do certain subsets of those things. And I think what we're doing and what we're talking about today and in the office is, can microlearning or sort of performance support, things like job aids, actually change that curve for your organisation? So we sort of say, well, look, classic example I think that we've been working with in first aid is, in Australia, there's lots of critters that bite you or can bite you. Doesn't happen very often, despite common misconceptions. But bites and stings are more common during summer. Snakes are out, spiders are out and breeding. If we actually use microlearning and actually push the microlearning to school teachers, to the community, to practitioners at swimming pools and pool lifeguards, where bees and wasps and that sort of stuff tend to sort of come around swimming pools, if we pushed a microlearning course to those people during the months before summer and over summer, can I stop that curve, right, and push it back up? And then we know it's going to sort of drop down again. But could I push or do a workplace refreshment? So it could be a toolbox conversation on a construction site saying, we want to focus on this particular skill because we know it expires, because you don't get to practice it very often. And we just call it the sawtooth model. Can I maintain my competencies in my organisation or my community and just keep them above an acceptable threshold? And this all started many years ago for me with airport security training. So I was involved in a research project with somebody doing their PhD. And in airport security, there was this idea that we should have a threshold of 90%. In fact, it was a statutory requirement that airport security staff needed to maintain a competency of 90%. So if we sort of put a dotted line above there, they did case studies where they sort of said, if somebody just does the course and is deemed competent on this date and current for a period of time, what does that curve look like? If they did training, they found that within 3 months, people were below that 90% threshold, right? In effect, not meeting their training requirement. So they started introducing just little workplace refreshers. morning sort of meetings, weekly meetings. We're just going to refresh these skills. How do you actually say somebody you want to do a search? How do you stop somebody at airport security? How do you actually introduce yourself and actually say what is about to happen? So by doing that and having these little interventions over time, they were able to change the model in the workplace where they knew they could maintain this competency. So we're calling it the sawtooth model because obviously you look at that, it looks like a sawtooth. That is what I think microlearning can do. And it's not always microlearning in a digital sense so that you might push that learning to somebody. It could be job aids, it could be refreshers in the workplace, it could be a monthly meeting where we just recap one of our skills. And in the first aid one, that's CPR. Just reminding people that it's 30 to 2. Okay, now that's in our country, Australia. You might have to check yours. But 30 compressions to 2 breaths to the beat of Staying Alive by the Bee Gees, another Australian group. You can do these sorts of things and provide these sort of interventions in the workplace to maintain this competency. What does xAPI and microlearning have to do with this? And the thing I sort of love about xAPI is it's not just about an online course that issues an xAPI statement. Okay, it could be a workplace intervention or a workplace action that actually happens. The thing about an xAPI statement is we have actor, the verb, right, and the object. Greg completed first aid, right? Greg completed CPR training. It's so beautiful, this language, and I've done other videos on this, but xAPI is absolute gold. Call it a work of art, and it is a work of art. So if we actually put that in, that Greg completed first aid, and you can have subsets of that and say Greg completed CPR training as an element of that. Out of the box, xAPI doesn't sort of do two things. It doesn't actually say the parent of bleeding or CPR. Let's stick with CPR. The parent of CPR was first aid, right? But you can actually, it's an extensible language, so you can actually say the parent. First aid parent is probably something like school teaching. You're a school teacher. One of the sub-requirements of that or sub-competencies is first aid. So let's just put school teacher in. The other thing you can do is you can actually have a thing called context in your xAPI statement. And this context could be face-to-face course. I would actually suggest, just for this example, this is formal training, because I'm about to align this to the 70-20-10 model. So the idea is that my initial context for my training in the xAPI statement is in a formal context, Greg obtained the competency of first aid. Then over time, I did some social learning. Okay, that was just a refresher at the morning meeting. Once a month we have a morning meeting and we sort of go, look, I just want to remind everybody the CPR rate's 30 to 2. All right, if you can remember that, we're doing well. But then you can also record in xAPI statement experiential stuff. So we've got formal training where I can say the context was formal. I can actually say everybody attended this morning's meeting, so we actually had some social learning around that. That might be a mentor, might be a staff meeting, might be a lunchbox meeting, toolbox, stand up, whatever, but there was some social learning that went on. And we could say that Greg was the teacher who responded to a bites and sting situation. So we can record xAPI statements and say it was experience. Greg actually got to practice that skill. So if you wanted to start to understand your curves, you could very, very easily use this to say what things are dropping off my curve. Because if I'm recording xAPI statements about people's experience, and you think every time somebody has a first aid incident in the workplace, there'll be a form that's filled in. There's no reason why that form couldn't generate an xAPI statement and load it into your learning repository system and say, Greg had this experience with fractures or poisoning or whatever. So you can actually record those experiences, which would inform you, I believe, if we go back to this graph here, it would inform you of the things that are absent, that people aren't getting experiences and those sorts of things. So they're the things that are more likely to drop off. Microlearning is a little way you could push that. I used the example before that with microlearning, we could actually push some training to somebody pre-summer when it's more likely that there's going to be bites and stings. So that push learning, a little 5-minute reminder of what are the CPR rates, a little 5-minute reminder on bites and stings. School's about to return, teachers do a lot of professional development before they get back into the classroom, and they're on playground duty, you could do soft tissue industries and grazers. So as I say, I think some of the things that are just running around our office at the moment, we're really curious about the power of xAPI and microlearning to sort of fill these gaps and work with this sawtooth model and correct it. So now, that's my little sort of summary of the discussions that have been going on probably for about a month here, is how can we sort of manage these things and record these things in the workplace. The challenge for you, I think, I'd love you all to go off and actually pick a competency in your workplace that actually has some impact. And it may not be first aid, but it might be performance impact. If somebody gets to rarely do something, but when they can't do it 2 years on, that it might have a high impact on performance, on quality, in a manufacturing process. There's a task that you're supposed to do if something happens. It rarely happens, so that when it does happen, the person doesn't know or is not confident on how to respond. If you could go and draw this for one of the competencies in your workplace that has a high impact, that is troubling you at the moment, summarize it, write it in the comments. If you're able to upload a picture of your graph, I'd be really interested to see that. And I'd just like to know, did this resonate with you? So there we go, there's today's thing. We're calling it the 3 C's: current, competent, and confident. So if you like today's video, click the follow button. If you want to be notified of upcoming videos, there's the notify bell, click that. And use the comments below. We'd like to really hear what you have to say about this. And if you think somebody else in your organisation should watch this video, share it. Thanks.